God, no! 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 No!
Legendary is one of those games where once you see the cover, you either go, interesting, let me see it, oh my god! Or you go, I know exactly what this is, and I consent. It's one of those Unreal Engine shooters that you see a lot in the PS3 and Xbox 360 era, which are pretty box standard shooters, but then they threw in some curveball in it, like aliens, dinosaurs, North Koreans, horny girls, or in this case, legendary creatures. When it was first announced at the time, I was a wee lad that loves playing video games, mythology creatures, and stuff. So of course when I first saw the trailers for Legendary, I was hooked. But then when it was released, I just somehow forgot its entire existence. But it stayed with me as a brain wrinkle waiting to activate later down the line. And that time was when I was looking at Dragon's Dogma 2 footage with its Griffin fights, and then snap! A brain wrinkle just activates, and then it all come flooding back to me. So here we are, at the precipice of fate, about to find out if the game was as bad as people said it was. Developed by Spark Unlimited for the PS3 and Xbox 360 and PC, aka the people who brought us Lost Planet 3 after this, and published by Game Media Group. So, how was it? Was it as bad as people make it out to be? Well, the premise of Legendary is that Charles Deckard, a professional thief of great renown, was hired by a secret society called the Black Order, and its leader to steal and open a mysterious box that was found in the ocean and now put into a museum in New York. Aided by a Black Order liaison, Charlie got to the box easily enough and opens it, getting his hand stabbed in the process, giving him a weird symbol on his hand. But surprise surprise, turns out it's Pandora's box, and now he turns into wait, wrong game. Now he has unleashed monsters of myth into the modern world. So, how does Charlie deal with this problem? By causing a mythological extinction with guns and magic powers, of course. First, let's talk about the settings and how unstable the frame rate is. I'm using a 1050 with an i5 and 8GB RAM, which is nothing by today's standards, but it's future tech compared to the specs when the game was released. And I also tried lowering the graphical fidelity, which didn't do anything except making the game looks worse. Also, you can't choose specifically what to downgrade, you have to choose presets instead, which, of course, doesn't really do anything except making the game look worse. And me not recording also didn't fix the frame rate problems. So I'm sorry for the laggy gameplay footage. This is just how the game is. At least the game does allow you to play it at 1080p without futzing around with the config data or being forced to mod it in. There's also a setting for MFX, which when I look it up was the American Balance Fund? What? Which that can't be true. So I looked it up some more, and it seems that Far Cry 2 has it too. And apparently, it's some kind of lighting system in your room that will reflect what's happening in the game. Looks pretty cool if a bit tacky to be honest. That's a fun remnant from those prehistoric times. Anyway, sound settings can't be changed separately either. There's only a master volume which will turn down everything in the game. But there is an option to turn off the music entirely. What can be changed though is the controls, which is a great thing and all games should have it. And also being able to turn off aim assist. Overall, the option settings weren't very good, and it's kinda obvious that this is a console port, with it lacking a lot of options to tinker with. But for technical issues, other than the horrid frame rate, the game is surprisingly stable and never crashed on me once. There's some weird ragdoll physics and unrealisms happening, but there's nothing really that hampers the gameplay in my playthrough. Except there was one part where the game loads infinitely, which requires me to force restart the game and replay the section again to fix it, but after that, the game plays normally again. But enough about the options and technical issues, how's the game itself? Presentation wise, the game definitely looks very unreal, and by that I mean it has all the unrealisms of the Unreal Engine. Textures not loading, the sheen of the character models, pop-ins, and weird ragdolls. Textures also looks blurry even when it loads, and those character models can look pretty rough. The art style of the game itself looks like any Unreal game that's on the market during the time when it was released. Animations can look pretty jerky for the humans, but they actually look pretty good for the monsters themselves. All 7.5 of them. Well, 9.5 if you count the bosses. With special care can be seen on the werewolves, where they have animations for climbing the walls. Especially the alphas, where you can even see them regenerating their skin, which the first version didn't have for some reason. Though some like the Griffin, that while looks good, usually dies in a spectacularly anticlimactic way, by just turning into meat if they get hit by a missile. And yes, not get blown into meat, they just turn into meat. I do have to say that I'm mostly talking about their fidelity, not their designs, which I have beef with, some of them at least, but we'll talk about that later. And the sounds they make are mostly pretty decent too, with only some of them being obvious stock sounds. But even Bloodborne used stock sounds, so it's not that big of a deal. And talking about sounds, the music in this game is weird. It sounded like it's more for a game like The Last of Us, instead of a Roland Emmerich style disaster movie with country guitar tunes.
Get away from the museum! Hurry!
I don't know how to explain it. I'm not a music guy, but I do know that I usually like the experimental, inappropriate music. But this one just doesn't really hit the mark for me, especially when the entire soundtrack had barely any variety. But there is one moment where the music did hit, and that's because it's the main menu music theme. But otherwise, the music is quite jarring and can take you out of the experience, or just blends into the background, which can be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on what you're aiming for. I just think it's kinda nothing. Cutscenes looks weird, mostly because of the really jerky animations, and also sometimes you can even see the models resetting to get into the animation data for the cutscene. The direction for the cutscene also changes randomly. Sometimes it's on first person, sometimes it's on third person. There's really no rhyme or reason for this. It just really changes depending on what the game is feeling at the time. Sometimes they also transition into an art slideshow, and I couldn't help but feeling that it's probably for budget reasons, especially when the only narration from these cutscenes only comes from one character. And about that, the voice acting is actually fine most of the time. There's some flat deliveries here and there, but it was surprisingly decent.
Pandora's box, according to ancient myth, was a gift from the gods. A wedding present from a devious use, delivered with the warning that it should never be opened. Of course, Pandora's curiosity proved too strong, and she peeked inside, instantly releasing all the misfortunes of man.
But I do notice that the voice mixing is a bit off. While the game does look dated even for its age, it does excel when it goes full disaster movie, because those scenes does look pretty awesome and chaotic as it should be. It makes you feel like you're in a Roland Emmerich movie. Emmerich? I don't know. But this time, it's legendary creatures trying to kill you, instead of aliens, earthquakes, or giant iguanas. The feeling of being in a disaster zone, ground zero type, is pretty good in this game, with cowering and panicking people and just the sheer chaos of it. And also during the downtime after the chaos, where you get to see the people recovering from the free apocalypse outside, it can be pretty haunting sometimes, if they're not sprouting blood like a geyser. Skill is also something that the game does pretty well when it wants to. The New York levels particularly feels huge and great in scale when you're in the outside. But unfortunately, the game loves its indoor spaces, like warehouses, subways, and sewers. The game has a lot of indoor spaces, most of which are boring to look at, but there's still some interesting looking level designs, like the underground ruins in rural Britain, that's mostly just set up for a werewolf fight. And what do you fight werewolves with? Guns. And the guns in this game are a mixed bag, with some of them does feel and sound pretty powerful, and some of them feeling lackluster, with something like the shotgun and the assault rifle being on the complete opposite ends of the feedback spectrum, with the shotgun feeling powerful and the assault rifle feeling like a pea shooter. Even the pistol feels more powerful than it, probably because for some reason, they attach a a suppressor onto it, when there's no stealth elements at all in this game. Thankfully, the other weapons generally feels powerful, like the LMG and the Desert Eagle feeling punchy, especially when the game still has that Unreal style blood spray, you know the one, and the flamethrower. Then while the fire does look pretty weak, it actually feels good when you manage to set someone on fire and how it affects them. It's actually pretty satisfying, if a bit sadistic. Speaking of sadism however, guns can tear apart the limbs of humans or monsters. You can decapitate werewolves, but it's not a true decapitation because the head will just disappear instead of actually cut off. But human enemies can actually get dismembered by monsters or grenades, with limbs actually flying off. I don't know why they have selective dismemberment, but it does hamper the feedback of the guns or the axe a bit. But the game does actually look half decent when you're fighting in a place with a lot of destructible environments, where some enemies can even throw things at you. It makes the fights feel dynamic. Overall, the game definitely has an edge well, but there's still some parts of it that's actually pretty decent. Good even, but it was marred by the other stuff, like what seems to be budgetary constraints, some weird design choices, technical issues, and the Unreal Engine freaking out. The game looks and sounds best when it's going full Roland Emmerich, which I wish there's more of that in the game than sewers and subways. Gameplay-wise, the gameplay is like any traditional first-person shooter at the time, with some twists. Level designs are straightforward with no branching paths. You can still explore and get collectibles, but the collectibles are pretty generic and they're mostly just people reacting to the furry apocalypse, or orders for the soldiers. While most of the time it spends shooting, there's some puzzle platforming sections to break up the pace, but this was a bad idea, simply because of how finicky the movement is. Charlie can jump, but the jump sucks. It barely goes vertically, but when he sprints and jumps, he can just straight up fly. The horizontal reach is way too much. He's like the opposite of Dante in that regard. While Dante has stupid high vertical jumps with almost no forward momentum, Charlie has incredibly weak vertical jumps but insane forward momentum. This is particularly bad because you have to jump between moving platforms, so it's extra. There's also moments where you have to shoot winches that the game doesn't tell you about. That while I do appreciate that the game is making me figure it out for myself, I feel like there should be at least one moment where the game teaches you that you can do it in a very obvious way, because the shootable objects blends into the background quite often, but I'm just nitpicking. This is not that big of a deal after the first time, but the game can actually teach you about mechanics in a more organic way later on, which I will talk about when we get to it, and I feel like they could have done the same with the winches. The game is also probably one of the earlier games that I've seen that tries to hide its loading screens. Legendary does it by blocking you with keypads, and there's a lot of these, which is surprising because most of the time, the levels are small areas. There's barely any area that feels like a truly open arena. It does break the pacing a little bit, but just like the winches, it's more of a nitpick. Thankfully, there's no hacking minigame. Fuck hacking minigames. Back to those twists, the first twist is that the game doesn't have a regenerating health system. You have a normal health bar, but you don't regain it by getting health packs. You instead gain health back by absorbing enemy's energy, either from the environment or from dead monsters, with this card hand called the Signet. Then you need to actively regenerate. You can do this even while sprinting, and with the sprint being omnidirectional and has a generous amount of stamina bar, Charlie is surprisingly mobile, which is a good thing, because some of the arenas does require you to run around and avoid the furries. And it can be actually pretty fun. But back to the Signet thing, Charlie can also shoot the shockwave from his hand that will stun enemies and blast some objects away. The shockwave is effective for getting enemies off you, but it takes quite a chunk of your enemy's charge, so you can't use it willy-nilly, or you'll be out of juice to regen, and that's no good. It's also super effective against one specific enemy, but I'll talk about that later. And that's it for the Signet powers. What, you thought there was more? Me too, to be honest. They kinda dropped the ball with the Signet. They could have done so much more with it, but instead we just got two really basic abilities. Like seriously, not even a frontal shield? And there's also no upgrade system or anything like that in the game, including for the guns. What you see is what you get. Well, there are some sections where you use enemy's energy for horde fights to charge machines with them while holding off an endless horde of monsters. But that's just a story thing. And much later on, you can reverse engineer a monster taming machine, but those are few and far between. And you can't tame monsters on your own using the Signet or anything. Foreshadowing is another device. I think for palm powers, they really should have taken more from Bioshock, or even Singularity, ignoring the fact that it came out 2 years after Legendary. I think it's the gold standard for palm-based first-person shooter powers. Singularity, I mean, not Bioshock. And talking about shooters, it does the pew pew pretty decently. Gun feels good, most of the time. And the feedback for the people they're being shot at was also satisfying enough, but it's nothing special compared to the other shooters at the time. There's 9 weapons in the game, 11 if you include the throwables. You got the axe, a pistol, an SMG, an assault rifle, a shotgun, an LMG, a flamethrower, and a missile launcher. And for the throwables, you have a grenade and a Molotov. Kinda disappointing that the game doesn't have a fantastical weapon to use. Games like this usually have 1 or 2 weapons that are weird, like particle cannons or pulse rifles. But Legendary went all the conventional weapons route, which is certainly a style, but when you're not a realistic modern military shooter, I think there should be one mandatory weird weapon. I guess you can say that it's the flamethrower, but meh. you can only carry 2 guns with you, but ammo is plentiful usually, through weapon drops or ammo stashes. So you don't need to switch them up because you ran out of ammo, except for rare weapons like the flamethrower. Most of the weapons also fulfills their own niche pretty nicely. But I feel like just like in every FPS games, the pistol becomes useless when there's just so much better choices around. And the SMG just gets supplanted by either the assault rifle or the LMG, unless you ran out of ammo for them somehow. They mostly feel pretty good, they sound good and has a realistic recoil to make the gunplay fun enough. With the only complaint that I have that's not specific to one weapon is the pretty lackluster muzzle flares, with the only one that can be explained away being the assault rifle, which uses a suppressor for some reason. The guns are also oddly accurate when you hip fire. It generally hits where the crosshair is. You can actually exploit this because hip firing doesn't have as much recoil compared to when you're aiming down the sights, which to be honest conflicts with the health design. But only when you fight humans, as some parts of the game seems to want you to run and gun, while others want you to pop and shoot. The axe though was pretty disappointing. Just by looking at the animation, you might think it's supposed to be a crowbar, but unlike that other crowbar, this one has a pathetic hitbox, it can't stagger enemies, and it has slow speed. I mean, it is an axe, but it doesn't feel like an axe at all. So instead of using it as a close range weapon, it's only useful to break stuff or cut werewolves' head when they're down. And even then, it's not that good for cutting the furries' heads off, because switching to it is pretty slow. Slow enough to have other furries jump on you while you're switching to the axe. So you just blow their heads off with your gun instead. It's much quicker, easier, and ammo is plentiful, so why bother? If the game has scarcer ammo, or has faster switching, or quick melee button even, then I see some use for it. But at the present, the axe is basically useless, except for breaking boards. The other guns aren't very notable too. They're basically your standard FPS guns, with them generally satisfying enough to shoot, but the main difference is what they're shooting them at. Oh, a quickie. There's a reload exploit in this game. If you reload but then sprint the moment the magazine is loaded in, you can actually finish the animation faster, which does help when you're running and gunning, but it doesn't really help with the shotgun due to its different reload animation. This can become a lifesaver when you're fighting hordes of enemies, which, while we're at it, there's 2 enemy factions, the Black Order Troopers and the Legendary Monsters. The Black Order Troopers, which I will call bots from now on, are generally not fun to shoot at unless it's a headshot. They like the feedback that the monsters get when they get shot at, with them only doing a dying animation than ragdolling. It's kinda lame to be honest. You can't gip them, yes I call it gip not jip. Anyway, you can't gip them with conventional guns, only grenades. Which does make the grenade types actually fun to use, especially when both of them are contact grenades. Well, you can make the normal frag grenades explode anytime you want, and you carry both types at the same time, which is nice. Okay, got sidetracked there a bit, back to the bots. The bots have their own enemy types, from the automatic weapon gunners, shotgunners, and fire bats. All types are similar enough to each other, but the fire bats fights more like a heavy type, with the armor and slow speed. Basically they're the juggernauts of the game, just a bit weaker. As they're only slightly tougher than the normal ones, and can be fragged to death quite easily. The bots' AI is pretty stupid too. They never really flank and only goes about randomly while taking cover. Not very effectively though. They do shell out when there's a grenade, but they're too slow to react to the frags, even when you give them time to run away. Shotgunners will also try to shoot you from far away, ineffectively. Their AI is definitely not the best, but it's serviceable I think. It works sometimes. But they definitely don't hold a candle to something like Fear or even Call of Duty. Most of the time, they spawn through doors, but sometimes they can also come in from these futuristic hinds which you can actually shoot down if you have a rocket launcher, which is a nice detail actually when the game allows you to. With that said however, they're the more dangerous faction of the two, simply because you can't leech off their enemy's energy for you to regen health, and they can shred your health really fast, so fights with them turns into a janky cover shooter that doesn't have a lean. Unless you have a flamethrower and you wanna risk it all, then it can be pretty fun. You can try doing it with the shotgun, but the erratic movements and the shotgun's slow rate of fire makes it really dangerous. Or you can just grenade them. Grenades are fun. What's not fun though is fighting human enemy types. Well, most of the time, but thankfully the game kinda knows this, as they never endlessly respawn like the monsters. And while we're at that, monsters are Legendary's bread and butter enemies, and the main selling point. Like, who doesn't want to shoot the griffin with a missile launcher or reenact dog soldiers? And it's obvious this is where most of the care goes to, and I fully understand. It's the main selling point after all. The game has a bunch of monsters from multiple mythologies, from Celtic to Greek, so there's some variety there. And they all have their own gimmicks, which does make them more interesting to fight, like the fire drakes being weak to water, to the point that they literally die from being sprayed by water, which you can exploit by shooting the fire hydrants or shutting off their spawn points by activating the fire sprinklers. And they're also immune to the flamethrower, which is a nice touch. And I do like their design. They move around like armadillos and can shoot fireballs when they're glowing, so you know and juke it when it's coming. They're definitely one of the more inspired enemy types in the game. The Naris are also pretty cool, where they're not throwing an infinite amount at you. They're incorporeal most of the times, unless they're attacking, or you blast them with a shockwave. While the game introduces to them by them possessing objects and then throwing them at you, in reality, they're just gonna claw your face off. They're by far the most annoying enemy type in the game. There's so many of them, and the way the game visualizes you getting damaged by melee attacks is very jarring. It gives you this claw ketchup smear that blocks your view a bit, which while fine when you're just fighting one or two enemies, but when you're fighting hordes of them, holy shit! It's the exact opposite problem human enemies, where you can't tell how much you're getting shredded unless you look at your health bar. Or you just die suddenly due to the lack of feedback from getting damaged by bullets. Sorry for the side tangent, it just comes to me sometimes. But back to the monsters. There's Echidnas, no not that one, which are just barnacles from Half-Life but on steroids. Pretty disappointing really, especially when the game doesn't even let you fight the main body, which the game implies that they have. So you just fight the tentacles. And then there's the Griffin. They're the box art enemy, there's even two of them. You could say they're the flagship monsters of Legendary. Their design are pretty basic as griffins go. I probably won't be able to tell which one's from Legendary and which one's from Dragon's Dogma. While they're mostly used for set pieces, the ones that you actually get to fight are pretty rare. And most of them can be get rid of by shooting a rocket at them. There's only one griffin in the game that you have to fight conventionally as a boss fight. And it's a pretty basic and easy boss fight to be honest, with the amount of arsenal that you have at the time. The destruction that you and the griffin can cause though is pretty cool. Shame there's only one time that you fight them for real. There's also Tsuchigumos, the only whip representation in the game, which are basically the Minecraft creepers. They explode on contact with anything, and while their damage is pretty small, they spawn endlessly unless you destroy their nests, which sometimes hides in the fence, and you need to use the environment to kill them, and the game never tells you about this. You actually have to figure it out for yourself, which was nice. I like when games trust me enough to solve a problem. There's enough environmental hints for you to figure it out for yourself, which is the way to do it organically than the winch puzzle I talked about earlier. The next one is the Minotaurs. They're pretty much your standard bullfight enemies, with them getting increasingly feral as their health goes down. And fighting them can be pretty fun, especially when there's enemies around. But man, the design for them sucks. Why do they look like a roided up barnyard cows? Like the Minotaur from Oblivion actually has a better design than this. For what it's worth, they're pretty fun to fight though, even if they're also pretty rare. And they definitely left an impression on me, good and bad. And last but not least, the werewolves.
That angel smile, stay.
AKA where most of the budget and development went to. Quite literally, there's two types of werewolf in the game, which no other enemy gets, and they can interact with the environment like no other enemy can, from climbing up walls, throwing objects at you, actually using ambush tactics, and killing them requires a special method, which is decapitation or incineration, or they're just gonna get back up. The game loves its furries. Well, the weaker type that doesn't have fur, called Limos werewolves, got the shorter end of the stick. Like they don't have the regenerating skins that the furry alphas have. And also they can't pounce on you and force you into a QTE where you use the arrow keys, yes, arrow keys, to kick them off or blow their heads off. Poor Limos werewolves. They're bold and nobody loves them. I do feel like that the wolf people are the most fun enemy type in the game, with most of their fights being dynamic. Like, they usually have other human enemies to contend with, which they will also attack. And thankfully, the game's AI doesn't have that gang up on the player mentality that games with multiple enemy factions have. They fight each other all the time, unless you caught their intention. And the monsters have their own special animation when they're killing humans, whether it's enemies or buddies. And all monsters have their own specific animations when they kill a human, and they can be pretty brutal. And you're gonna see it pretty often too, because monsters can kill a human in 1 or 3 hits. Although later on, the boss will have taming machines that will make the monsters ignore them unless you feed animus energy into them. In which case, the monster will ignore you and attack them instead. How the turntables. And you can also use this moment to attack the tougher monsters without fear of retaliation. Only for a limited time though, before it reverts back, so it's safer to just destroy them after using them once. But it's fun while it lasts. I do wish the game lets you tame monsters anytime. For Shadow, the game also has a few bosses. Well, just one honestly, which I will talk about in the story spoiler section. And talking about something that is story adjacent, the game has a codex where you can see additional info about the stuff that you encountered and look back at the collectibles that you picked up. They're pretty basic, except for one thing, which I will talk about in the story section. It is nice for world building though, and does teach things a bit about the mythology and stories. Until you look it up, and found out a lot of it are bullshit. Like there's no limos werewolves for example, but there is in the world of Legendary, so it counts as world building in a weird way. And talking about stories, next I'll talk about the story, the characters, and some specific sequences like boss fights. There will be spoilers ahead, and due to the way the game is set up, it will also be a story recap, so it's gonna take some time. Skip to this timestamp if you want to experience the story for yourself. Are they gone? Alright, let's do this. Legendary begins when the Pandora's box was found at the bottom of the ocean. The people who found it didn't know what it is, and put it in a museum in New York, you know, for research. The Black Order, a secret evil organization bent on conquering the world with the power of the Pandora's box, led by LeFay, immediately knew what it is and hires a professional thief by the name of Charles Deckard, or as I like to call him, Charlie. That's you, by the way. He kinda looks like what if Frank West and Adam Sandler made a baby. Charlie's tasked to recover the box before the rival organization, the Council of 98, another secret ancient organization with the aim of protecting the box, gets to it first, while being aided by a Black Order agent and operator, who is also the narrator, Vivian Kane. This was all in a section that's helpfully called the opening slideshow in the main menu, that is separate from the actual campaign for some reason. Anyway, Charlie gets to the box and opens it, which scars his hand and accidentally costs 911 times 11. This part is one of the highlights of the game. You get to see the full destruction of the monsters wreaking havoc in New York City. There's even a Stay Puft Marshall Man-sized golem running amok. It's kinda like Reverse Gate. Remember that anime? No? Me neither. Vivian then tells Charlie to get to safety and meet up with her. Apparently, Vivian was in the dark just as Charlie is right now. After surviving an encounter with the fire drakes and furless furries in the sewers and warehouses, where you do the worst platforming in the game, Deckard and Vivian finds out that the Black Order is now trying to kill them. Vivian for knowing too much, and Charlie for still being alive. Vivian then gets the idea to even the odds by calling the Council 98, which reveals that she already has associates inside Council 98. Then the game introduces you to the last important character in the game, Lexington Whitedeer. Not gonna lie, that's a pretty cool name. And yeah, there's only like 4 characters in the game, including Charlie, who's barely a character. Anyway, they actually came in and helped you out, and while it has some bumps, it did work out in the duo's favor, provided they also helped them out in return. This begins the second part of the New York level, where you have to deal with the Stay Puft Golem problem, with the help from EMPs, just like Monsoon, Lawrence Wars, go! Not because it's destroying New York or anything, but because it ate Pandora's box. But of course, because this is a video game, we first must take a detour to the sewers, where we meet our first Naris and Echidnas, but also our shotgun. This is also where you get to fight with allied soldiers against the monsters and the bots, first skirmish notwithstanding. And I gotta say, they're pretty useful. Yeah, they're fragile, but they provide a good distraction for you to close in or take out enemies safely while getting mobbed, which you'll get to experience very soon when the infinite spawning Naris is coming to get you. But after leaving the sewers, you get to the first horde section of the game, where you have to charge your animus by killing the horde that is coming for you. Then give it to the MP machines while also avoid getting stepped on by the Stay Puft random junkmen. You do this 3 times, 1 in the streets, 1 in the subway, and 1 in the destroyed building filled with Naris. Very fun! So after playing an annoying game of catch with the Naris, you activate the last one and kill the Stay Puft Garbage Pile Man. Not to waste an opportunity, however, the Black Order immediately sends their troops to recover the box. So backtracking there while fighting bots and monsters, you find out that their dropship has actually crashed. I guess even they took the horror media helicopter license test. Anyway, the box suddenly sends out a pulse which makes the monsters incorporeal, unless you hit them with a shockwave first. I didn't say anything about this in the gameplay section because you only face these types twice in the entire game. It's like the game was trying to make the shockwave more of a main mechanic, but can't decide if they want to commit to it or not. Another horse section later, Charlie gets saved by the council soldiers and gets taken in with Vivian. After recovering in their base of operations, Vivian reveals the location where most of the Pandora's box research was done to the council, and they start a new operation to secure it. But they didn't invite Charlie to the party because of his apparently important glowing hand, which was a smart decision on their part. Charlie though decides to invite himself to the operation, and they just go along with it for some reason, not counting the people that's supposed to guard him. This is the first time Charlie actually shows agency and personality in the story, unless you read the PDA entries. Before he just got ordered around to do stuff, kinda like Ramirez in that way. Charlie is a silent protagonist. He doesn't talk at all during cutscenes, so most conversations are one-sided. And he doesn't get to show his so-called professional thief side unless you read his PDA entries, where you get to see his thoughts on a lot of stuff. Kinda like how Isaac Clarke was in Dead Space 1, the OG, not the remake. Also, the PDA clears up some plot points that's left unexplained in the story. Remember how in the prologue he was told to recover the box, but in the opening cutscene he didn't recover it, but instead opened it? Seems kinda stupid of him, right? Well, the PDA reveals that Levi himself told Charlie to open the box, and that he wants the box opened far from him. The PDA also provides Charlie's personal insight and personality. It's very weird, but I do feel that there might be a similar situation with the First Evil Within also happens here, where data entries was one of the last things to be added in the development, causing a difference between the personality or the non-personality of the main character in-game and the data entries. Anyway, they got to the location, got attacked with griffins, and crash landed in rural Britain.
Keep her airborne or go down! Race for surrender!
Hey, you. You're finally awake.
Charlie and Vivian was fine from the crash, but Alexander got knocked out, so Vivian has to babysit him. So Charlie has to explore the countryside alone, which apparently still has civilians running around. Well, just one. Now there's 0 civilians running around. As you can see, the monster problem has reached here too. And speaking about monsters, this is where you get to meet Tsuchigumo's children, and the Steve NPC death animation. And also the furry werewolves. They build up to them quite nicely, which made me realize they only build up the werewolves and not any other monsters, except the Nari. And even then, it's much quicker. They really do love their furries. After moving through another sewer while dealing with furries, Charlie groups up with the other surviving council soldiers for evac, but not so fast because the furries put a stop to that. So instead they just sleep in the middle of the furry hot zone and wait until daytime to begin their assault on the research facility.
They are rage, brutal, without mercy. But you will be worse. Rip and tear until it is done.
Picking up in the middle of a gunfight, you immediately start blasting bots and monsters, so you can get to the cathedral where the research facility is, meaning your first Minotaur in the way, and also your first Deagle. Everything goes smoothly enough until you reach the cathedral where you get to fight your first Griffin, aka the first real boss fight of the game. The Griffin was nothing much though, and dies quickly enough to grenades and the Deagle. Then you enter the cathedral as the council soldiers stages their last assault at the troopers. Man, I kinda wish I cared more about the other council soldiers, but they're all pretty much nameless goons and can die to the most unfortunate of circumstances, especially when we already have such a minimalist cast as it is. Anyway, you keep pushing in against mostly human enemies with some furries barging in thinking that it's Rainforest joining the party, which culminates with a Griffin going full Kool-Aid Man and then dies from getting too excited. Rest is very hard. Moving on, you finally get to meet your first fire bat trooper, and by association, your first flamethrower, Toasty. It's the actual best run and gun weapon in the game, even better than the SMG, shotgun, or the LMG. Mostly because of how fast it stops enemy in their tracks and kills them. Just don't use them against fire drakes, because, you know. Anyway, Charlie, Steve, and the council soldiers gets into this facility. Oh my god, they kill Steve! Then they get the data drive that is conspicuously ready for them to take. Okay, the next level is quite a change of pace and I think it's really interesting. You get to explore the council's base of operations in London. For the very first time in the game, you get some downtime where you just explore and get lore dumped without any threat of a furry jumping you. And you also get to play around with the monsters and see how they fare against one another, and also humans, in these dev tool-like rooms. I also found it funny that Charlie can't pick up weapons from the walls, so can only pick up the weapons on the floor. But then, if you explore a bit to unlock the flamethrower cabinet, you can pick up the flamethrower off the wall. So what the fuck? You're free to explore and listen to chatter about things happening around the world, but then you're called to meet Vivian and Lexington in the research wing, as they're looking into the data they got from the facility, which reveals two things. One, they're making a machine that will allow them to control monsters while also killing Charlie in the process. But they need the box to activate it. Two, the data was a trap! And now the base gets attacked by monsters and bots. So you ran to topside to assess the situation, while the base is quite literally falling apart and on fire. Once you got up there, you get to see that the situation is in fact quite bad. And somehow London is having quite a massive flood right now. And there's something huge moving towards the base. Meet the Kraken, quite clearly based on the Clash of the Titans iteration. After the full reveal, it's quite the presence throughout the entirety of the level. So your mission now is to deal with it. So you get around, fight 2 Minotaurs at the same time, get the Double Trouble achievement, then get apologized for it. Backtracking a bit, this is where you also meet the first taming machine, and it's definitely kind of a power trip, but not as much as it could be. Oh wow, there's also some griffin infestation here. Unfortunately for them, I have a rocket launcher. Then you move around a bit, and you finally face the Kraken. The Kraken is kind of an RNG fight. It is a fight though, unlike the Stay Puft Garbage Pile Man. You can get easily squished by its tentacles, but if you're lucky, then it's a complete non-challenge. You just gotta load those rockets in, and shoot the tentacles with them. Then shoot its mouth while it roars. Rinse and repeat until it dies. And it doesn't get any harder either. I mean, boss will come up, but you probably kill it before they get to you. And there's griffins too, but like... After you've killed the Kraken, then the game loads, then loads, then loads, then loads, then loads, then loads, then loads. Then you realize that the game has frozen. So you restart the game, kill the Kraken again, then it's revealed that the bots have captured Vivian and the box, and is now taking them to New York for a bookend.
Again, it's like poetry, so that they rhyme. Every stanza kind of rhymes.
So of course, Charlie and the council went back there to bookend it. New York has turned into a hellhole since last time. It kinda reminded me of Alone in the Dark 2008. So you fight through New York again, back to its subways and sewers, and enter the somehow still pristine Black Order building, where you eventually meet up with Vivian, who tells you how to turn off the machine that will kill you and conquer the world. Remember, no furries. Oh, and Luffy is also there, with the last of the boss defense force, and some monsters. So you blow up the generators as protecting the machine, and overload it with Animus. It's a pretty anticlimactic fight, to serve as your final boss. Like, it's not even a real horde fight, and if you've been saving Animus, you can be done with this very quickly. Anyway, Luffy gets Jurassic Worlded. And the machine explodes, vaporizing Vivian and knocking out Charlie. With the threat now gone and the box destroyed, Lexington reveals that the Signet stores the data to make another box as a failsafe. So of course he volunteers Charlie to be the test subject and then takes him away. It's only then revealed that Vivian didn't get vaporized, and Charlie manages to escape from being volunteered and ending the game with a sequel hook of a shot. Fuck you. Legendary story and characters is, shall I say, messy. And nothing. It's a whole lot of nothing. Characters are barely characters, they didn't even interact with each other unless it's for exposition. Way too many plot points or foreshadowing are hidden in the PDA, which is not a good thing for a conventional narrative game like this. The awkward way the plot moves you around, the complete lack of other supporting characters, especially in your council allies, where they're only cannon fodder for them to get killed by the latest monster. While the deeper lore is interesting and has a lot of potential, it doesn't get delved into that much, especially with a lot of the collectible data being just nothing but fluff. The pacing, while good at first during the disaster parts, never really slows down so you can sink yourself into the world. And while there are moments of silence where the game hypes up a new type of monster, or see how the monsters affect normal people, but those moments are few and far between, and the game just likes to throw you into the gauntlet of infinite monsters, even during platforming puzzles. The game also never really explored how the rest of the world reacts to the monster apocalypse. You only get a few concept art of things happening in other parts of the world. Also, there's some glaring omissions in the monster picks. Like, where's the dragons? We have legendary creatures but no dragons? They do have it in the concept art, but there's no dragons in the game itself, only fire drakes. What, are they afraid to be compared to Rain of Fire? The game also ends very abruptly in trying to bookend it with no final boss fight, and a really easy final battle. They should just make you fight a dragon for the final battle. As it is right now, it's very anticlimactic. There was real potential in Legendary's story, on building a world of secret societies and a world that's just finally awakened to monsters and magic. There's some incredibly strong foundations for a very interesting world here. A modern futuristic world with living, breathing mythical creatures. How will people in other parts of the world react to them? How will the governments of the world react to them? Because weirdly enough, there's no actual military response that came in to handle this situation. Only the secret societies. It made the world feel empty and secluded, and the plot itself is just kinda nothing. The characters has no other real motivations other than just surviving and dealing with the box problem. It's just sad that Legendary's true story potential will probably never get realized. Legendary was a mediocre but interesting experience to say the least. I do say that it's not as bad as people say it was, if the frame rate was better that is, and the gameplay itself was sometimes fun, it's nothing special and basic, but it has one hell of an interesting concept, which they executed brilliantly, like in the first half hour of the game, but then never really does it again, at least to that degree. They have so many things going for them, just on the premise alone, but they execute it in the most boring way possible after the beginning disaster set pieces. And that premise is so good, it's basically the thing that carries the game for me. The graphical art style makes the game looks like any other Unreal game. The story goes nowhere except at the very end, with a lot of interesting lore bits hidden in the PDA. Untapped potential in the world building. The guns, while decently fun enough to use, are painfully generic with no super special weapons at all. And the Signet being a complete waste of potential when it could have been a catalyst for a lot of interesting powers that they're saving for a sequel that will never come. And it's such a shame too, because Legendary could have been legendary in the right hands with huge franchise potential, but now it will forever languish in obscurity as a brain wrinkle within us waiting to activate somewhere down the line. Thank you for watching. It's amazing they've managed to reach the end of this video. A video about Legendary of all things, but I super appreciate it. Anyway, thanks again for watching, like, share and subscribe, because it will really help the channel to grow. But for now, see ya in the next video. Hopefully.